My name is Christina Whitf-Perry, and I'm Publishing Director for Confer and Carnac Publishing. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome all of you today to our virtual book launch to celebrate the publication of The Diary of a Fallen Psychoanalyst, the workbooks of Masud Khan, period 1967 to 1972. I'm absolutely astounded at the number of people that we're able to welcome today. I'm counting 220 plus. People are still coming in. And it's both an honor and a real pleasure to be able to introduce this long-awaited volume, which provides the opportunity for readers to engage with the thought and writings of Masud Khan at first hand. There's no doubt that he was a controversial figure, both during his life and perhaps even more so posthumously. And I'm looking forward to, alongside all of you, learning more about the significance of his life and work during the next hour and a half. The format of this event is going to be a conversation between Professor Brett Kahr and Dr. Linda Hopkins, Dr. Steven Kuchuck, all of whom have been involved in this publication. Brett Kahr wrote the foreword, and of course, Linda and Steven were the editors for this amazing volume. So we'll have about 40 minutes of conversation between the three of them, and then there will be an opportunity for you to ask your own burning questions. But of course, because there are so many of you, this may prove difficult and we may not be able to get to all of your questions. I also wanted to say that the doors will close in about half an hour. So hopefully all of you who want to come will have arrived by then. And I'm also absolutely astounded at how many of you are coming from far and wide. So it, you know, with our almost 300 participants now, we have people from obviously London, New York, California, Washington, DC, and lots of other places in the UK and the US. But also I've noticed from Mexico, we have people from Brazil, India, Finland, Canada, Greece, Turkey, Israel, South Africa, Romania, and my apologies to anyone who I haven't been able to honor your country that you're coming from. And I do hope that you all have a wonderful time. It now falls to me to introduce Brett Kahr, who is a long-standing supporter and friend of Carnac Publishing and has published numerous volumes himself, of which the most recent have actually been published with our publishing company, of which I'm very proud and delighted. So his two most recent volumes are Dangerous Lunatics, which was published in 2020, and the more recent Freud's Pandemics, which is part of the new Freud Museum London series, of which he is the general editor. So, Brett, without further ado, over to you.
Thank you very much, Christina, and greetings to everyone. I'd like to begin by expressing my gratitude to Christina Whitf-Perry, our publishing director, and to Lisa Gall, who is our new head of marketing and publicity, for organizing this event, and to everyone at the team at Confer, Confer books and Carnac books. So very kind of you to have put this together. And I want to extend my very warm thanks to everyone here for registering and joining us on this Saturday. I know for many of you, who are most of us are mental health practitioners in this very ugly chapter of world history. So to join us in the very early morning, those of you in California, or very late evening, those on the other side of the planet, it's really good to have you here, and we look forward to your thoughts and your comments during the discussion. It's an honor for me to facilitate a conversation with two very cherished colleagues, Dr. Linda Hopkins, who is with us in Washington, D.C. right now, and Dr. Steven Kuchuck in New York City, New York. And just before we embark on our conversation, I do want to express further thanks to two very particular individuals. Dr. Steven Setterberg, very experienced child psychiatrist and Jungian analyst, who is the founder, the executive director, and the publisher of Confer Books, Publishers of the Mind, and the newly relaunched Carnac Books. And Dr. Setterberg has been a big champion of these Masud Khan projects. So we're very, very grateful to you, Stephen, for all the work that you have done. And I believe Stephen is Zooming with us from California as we speak. And I know that Stephen and all the members of the team, and Steve and Linda, will agree with me that we must also pay tribute to a very special man, the late, great Harry Carnac, who was the founder of Carnac Books back in 1950. And he really was the first person to run for many decades the world's first fully psychoanalytical bookshop, and then from the 1970s onwards became a publisher of original psychoanalytical books. So he made a unique contribution globally to the dissemination of depth psychological knowledge through his book-selling work and through his publishing work. He was very public about the fact that he was in analysis with Masud Khan and held him in very high esteem. And Linda had interviewed the late Mr. Carnac many times. So I do want to salute Harry. I think it's very essential and very meaningful that these new books are published by Carnac Books. And I want to pay great tribute to these two books. This is the original edition of Linda Hopkins' wonderful biography of Masud Khan, which first appeared in 2006. And I'm delighted to say that Carnac Books have now released this lovely updated edition. Linda's written a new introduction for it. So if you've not read the full self, I can tell you I've read this biography at least 4 times, and it really is, in my estimation, the gold standard of psychoanalytical biographical writing. And alongside, here are the workbooks which Dr. Hopkins has co-edited with Dr. Kuchuck, and this will be the centerpiece of our discussion in the minutes ahead. So it's really good to have you all here. Now, Masud Khan, as you will all know only too well, was one of the most brilliant and yet most controversial, most provocative, and in the estimation of some, most unethical of practitioners at one point during his long and productive life. I think no two people have the same encapsulation of Masud Khan. But what I can tell you is that from his early years, he really was very impressive indeed. Linda has interviewed over 100 people who knew Masud Khan personally, and I too, from my own biographical research about the life and work of Donald Winnicott, who was one of Masud Khan's many training analysts, I met a lot of people who knew Khan also, and they all spoke of his time in the 1940s, 1950s, 1960s. They spoke of him as a real genius, a real superstar. And I remember when I was a young psychology undergraduate, stumbling upon his work for the first time, and I absolutely fell in love with his writing. The first paper I read by Masud Khan was his 1963 paper, Silence as Communication, in which he challenged the classical psychoanalytical notion that a silent patient is automatically aggressive or resistant, not participating in the free associative verbalization process. But Masud Khan said, no, there may be another meaning to silence. No two patients are silent in quite the same way. And I found that an incredibly helpful clinical insight, which still resonates in my own clinical practice to this day. And when I was growing up and training and getting to know people within the community, I met several of Masud Khan's former analysans, and I thought they were all incredibly decent, creative, highly accomplished, super bright people. So for me, he was a real hero. But then when his book came out just before his death, called When Spring Comes, Awakenings in Clinical Psychoanalysis, which was published in America under the title The Long Wait and Other Psychoanalytic Narratives, I was really, really shocked by what I read, because many people have come to conceptualize that book as a really anti-Semitic, homophobic, ethically violating book. And we were all in a state of shock. And I think the psychological community worldwide might still be in a state of shock over how we process the fact that this man could be both a genius and an angel on the one hand, but as some have said, possibly a madman and a devil on the other hand. So, we're here today for two reasons. First and foremost, to pay great tribute to the work that Linda and Steve have undertaken, but also to really see if we can all put our minds together and try and understand the deep complexity of human psychology. Because I think even though those of us who are very overtly psychoanalytically orientated appreciate how complex the human mind can be, the case of Masud Khan is really an indication that the mind may be even more complex than we often appreciate. So we will benefit, I think, from the insights and wisdom of both Linda and Steve. These two very, very long-standing and much admired colleagues will be familiar to all of us from their writings and from their teachings. Dr. Linda Hopkins trained as a scholar in Islamic studies many, many years ago, and then retrained in mental health and became first a licensed clinical psychologist and undertook not one but two psychoanalytical trainings. She had trained with the great David Scharf and Jill Savage Scharf, who recently received the much-deserved Sigourney Award from the International Psychoanalytical Association for their lifetime achievements. And she has also graduated from the IIPT, the International Institute for Psychoanalytic Training. And Linda's book on Masud Khan, which appeared in 2006 and then in several subsequent editions, has been really much lauded in the literature and received several prizes, including the Goethe Award from the Canadian Psychological Association, and also the famous American Gradiva Award, with which many of you, if not all of us, will be only too familiar. So, Linda, it's a great pleasure to welcome you here with us today. And you will all be familiar with Dr. Steven Kuchuck, who is with us today from his practice in New York. And Steve is, of course, one of the world's leading experts in relational psychoanalysis, modern contemporary approaches to psychoanalysis from a very compassionate, clinical, and very academically rigorous background. And Steve has been a very experienced teacher at a whole range of institutions, not only across the United States, but indeed across the world, and particularly the postdoctoral program at New York University, and also the National Institute for the Psychotherapies. And Dr. Kuchuck has written many, many books. I've been a real fan of his writings for a long, long time. And he's recently been, as you know, the president of the International Association for Relational Psychoanalysis and Psychotherapy. And one of Carnac books, the new Carnac book's best-selling titles, has been Steve's new book on relational, the relational revolution in psychoanalysis and psychotherapy. Steve, it's extraordinary that you managed to encapsulate all the richness and complexity of relational psychoanalysis in a 20,000 word, very affordable book. So I really recommend that those of you who've not yet read that, please do, and please assign it to your students and your supervisees. So it's terrific to have both Steve and Linda here with us today. Welcome, welcome. Well, let's jump right into the very, very complex and fascinating and troubling, but also inspiring story of Masud Khan. To me, although I'm a huge, passionate Sigmund Freud fan, as you know, he's always been my very favorite psychoanalyst. I think were I a film director, I would not make films about the life of Sigmund Freud. If I were working for Netflix, I would definitely commission a 6-part, 10-part series about the life of Masud Khan, because I think it's far more engaging than Game of Thrones, Downton Abbey, or the Harry and Meghan show. So let's begin to find out about who was Masud Khan. And I'd love to begin by asking you, Linda, as you began as a Khan biographer and scholar many years ago. How did you first encounter this man, and what made you want to write first a very detailed, archivally sensitive, clinically sensitive biography of Khan, and then work with Steve to edit these enormous workbooks?
There's so many people to thank. One of them is Brett, and another is Harry Carnac, two of the most important people to me in getting this done. But Carnac itself has been a great place to have, a great institution to have as a publisher, the newly formed Carnac, and I'm so happy to be working at a place that carries Harry's name. I'm going to just say a little bit about Masud Khan, and then I'll tell you how I got into this. Many people loved Masud Khan, and many people, and he had more intimate friends, really, truly intimate friends, than most of the people who are here on this Zoom, more than I have, that's for sure. He also had more enemies than most of you, as well as people who both despised him and loved him at the same time. It's a paradox that people could do that. He was no ordinary person. He had come to London in 1946, just before India engaged in a civil war where the India and Pakistan were formed and many people died. The family sent him over here. He was from a Muslim family with 8 sons. He was the youngest, and the other ones, well, only one was his blood brother, but the ones who were from his father's other wives were all in the military. And Khan was a token intellectual. So he came to England to study literature. And boy, did he study psychoanalysis. At age 22, this is for, I'm old now. There are people here who ought to do some writing about Masud Khan. How can it be that at the age of 22, when he had no background in psychology, he was, by mistake, accepted as a full analytic trainee by the British Psychoanalytic Institute. And so he's the youngest person to ever train. How did that happen? It might be because he had a lot of money. Even though he came from Pakistan, he came from an incredibly wealthy family, and he had a lot of that wealth. I don't think that's the only reason, though. I mean, he was a very amazing person, of course, I'm sure at 22. By 1975, so he came in 1946. By 1975, he was probably at his peak, although just maybe a little bit past his peak, because he started to go downhill after Winnicott died in 1971. Winnicott was really central to him. But at the International Congress in 1975, Erik Erikson said, "The future of psychoanalysis belongs to Masud Khan." By 1989, the year he died, he had been ejected from the British Psychoanalytical Society, which means he was no longer a member of the International Psychoanalytic either. And he is known, I would say, as the most disgraced analyst that there ever has been. So just to say a few more things before I tell you about my involvement. He was an incredible scholar of Western literature as well as psychoanalytic literature. His favorite books, his favorite authors were Shakespeare, especially King Lear, and Dostoevsky, The Idiot. And oddly enough, The Idiot I had studied Russian, and The Idiot was also my favorite book, and it's not the favorite book of most people by Dostoevsky. But anyway, King Lear and The Idiot actually played a big role in Masud's life in the West. Almost unbelievably, he seems to have played out the role of those people. And for example, he said, I have had to, in the West, I have had to invent a Masud for myself and live by him. I fabricated a phenomenon called Khan, who has very little to do with the private true me, Masud. Where I am most alienated from myself is when I relate to others. I just present fictions of myself. That's an incredible thing to say. People who read the workbooks will be able to make their own opinions of whether that's actually accurate. You'll see the influence of King Lear and The Idiot. I should say that we're publishing right now just the first third of the workbooks. They only go to 1972, the year after Winnicott died. There are 2 more volumes to come, and the later volumes show Khan slipping more and more into craziness. This volume, he's pretty close to his peak, although you can see some strange things. Okay. How did I get into this? So after I graduated from college, I went to graduate school in Arabic here in Washington, D.C. And when you study Arabic, you learn a lot about Islam. So when I moved to Philadelphia and changed careers, I became a clinical psychologist and then a psychoanalyst. I didn't lose my interest in Islam. And when I heard that there was a Muslim psychoanalyst in London, I immediately wanted to read his works. And just like Brett's experience, I found his writing amazing. I mean, if you haven't read his first 3 books, you're lucky, because there's some stuff there and they are not out of date. But when I was studying clinical psychology, it wasn't an analytic program. My advisor was a man. We were just into, psychotherapy, actually. We were very much into it. And I had a wonderful advisor who was named Herb Hampshire. He was charismatic, very, very influential on me and many of my fellow students. This is relevant to what happened and how I got to the workbooks. So just remember that name, Herb Hampshire. But when I graduated from clinical psychology, Herb moved on to Aspen. He came out as gay and made a new life in Aspen. I got totally out of touch with him. So I was immersed, not with Herb Hampshire, but in the world of Philadelphia psychoanalysis. There's 5 institutes there. I trained at one, but I went to lots of lectures and other things with the other institutes. And in 30 years, I never once was assigned a paper by Masud Khan. I never heard anybody talk about him. When he died in 1989, nobody mentioned his death, but there was one exception, a talk by a man named psychoanalyst named Salman Akhtar, a Philadelphia psychoanalyst who is Muslim, who obviously was influenced by him too, but that was one time in 30 years. So in the early 1990s, Khan died in 1989. In the early 1990s, I decided I wanted to write something. I had a little bit of free time. And I decided I would try to find out who Masud Khan was. I had no idea who he was. I had no idea that he had a controversial life or that an amazing life. All I knew was that I knew nothing. So almost at that exact time, Judy Cooper, a London psychotherapist, psychoanalytic psychotherapist, published a very wonderful short book called Think of Me as I Am, which was a short biography of Masud Khan. She had been in analysis with him, and he gave her a lot of personal information. And I was really lucky that it happened right at that time, because she kind of gave me an idea who the main people would be that I would want to be in touch with. And I wanted to, just because of who I am, I didn't like, well, in those days, I guess it was telephones. I wanted to talk to people in person. And so I did all my interviews. I decided to interview as many people as I could who had known Khan, and to interview them in person. So Judy told me some of the names of people who I would want to meet. And two of these were Robert and Sybil Stoller from Los Angeles. I was already going to California to see my best friend, Karen. And so I wrote to Bob and Sybil and asked if I could meet with them. Well, Sybil wrote back right away, and she told me that that Bob had died in 1992. He died in a car accident, but that she'd be happy to meet me. And so I arranged to meet with her. I should have said before this, though, that Judy Cooper's book also told me about the workbooks for the first time, because of course, I had never heard of the workbooks. And she revealed that the workbooks existed, 3,400 pages, never published, and not available for anybody to see until the year 2039. And the reason for that was because Masud Khan, in his craziness, had written many wills, but his last will, he had left everything to a Pakistani peasant, everything, all his estate, his papers, everything. So when the peasant came to claim the estate, he didn't want the papers. They were of no monetary value. He told the lawyer to just get rid of them. A committee of 4 people formed, saved the papers, but the way they saved them was they gave them to the International Psychoanalytical Association, of which Khan was no longer a member, of course. He would have hated that. But the IPA, thanks to them, good, thank you. They took the papers, the workbooks, but not only that, correspondence, a lot of other stuff, all kinds of other stuff. They took that and they were given the copyright. And they put a ban on people being able to read anything until 2039. They threw out from Khan's papers, they threw out the clinical patient stuff, because that has no right to survive. But the workbooks are not about patients, so they could survive, right? So there they were. But I in 2039, when I found out about this, 2039, I was going to be 90 years old. So that was, I just gave up on ever seeing them. Okay, now jumping to where I was before. I go to see Sybil Stoller. She has like a magnificent, wonderful home in Pacific Palisades. I spent the day with her. I also spent several other days with her. She knew a lot about Khan. She had known him throughout his life. And she gave me her correspondence, which was like 3 feet tall. And she talked a lot. But at one point she said, would you like to meet my sons? Because she had 4 sons who had all known Khan. And I said, sure. So she introduced me to her son, Roger Stoller. And the next time I came out, I had breakfast with him. I was sitting at breakfast with him, and he asked me, did my mother suggest that you talk to my brother, Jonathan, my twin brother? And I said, no, she never mentioned him. He said, well, Jonathan knew Khan pretty well. He's in Aspen now. He's living with a male psychologist, but he'd probably talk to you. I was like, what? I said, is that person's first name Herb? You remember that name? Yes, it was my advisor from Philadelphia. I now had a very personal connection to the Stoller family because Herb was an important part of that family. And anyone here, and I know there are some here who knew Herb, knows that he was an extremely influential guy. Herb talked to Sybil about me, and Herb found out that Sybil had been holding something back from me. He said that she absolutely should trust me, and he influenced her. So the next time I came out to the Pacific Palisades, I'm sitting there with her. She says, I've got something to tell you. What? She said, well, I actually have a complete copy of the workbooks. Masud gave them to me and my husband to read as he went along, and he gave us the copyright, and he gave us the right to pass the copyright on to other people if need be, because he wanted the workbooks to be published. I got to tell you that when I found out that Sybil Stoller had the workbooks in her closet right there, and she was going to give them to me and let me use them, I was absolutely blown away. It was one of the most surprising moments in my life. It was incredible. Of course, when I got back to Philadelphia, I immediately read the workbooks, and they're amazing. I knew that I wanted to publish them, but I was writing my biography, so that took a long time. I used the workbooks. I used the workbooks. It's a complicated story in my biography, but I waited for the other publication. And then when I finished my biography, I took a couple of years off. I got in a new relationship. I moved to Washington, D.C. And after a few years, I thought, okay, I'm ready to edit this 3,400 pages down, try to find a publisher. But it turned out there were all kinds of stresses associated with that. And this could be a book in itself of what happened. It is the reason why I met Steve, and it's how Steve got involved. And now I'm going to ask Steve to go from there.
I can't hear this story often enough. It's not just how Linda tells it, although of course you know that she is an incredible writer and storyteller, but it's how she lived it. It's an incredible story. Brett, did you want to say a few words?
Yes, no. Please, we'd love to know, Steve. I was going to ask you how you became involved and what it's like for you, given that, you've been so busy as the editor of the Psychoanalytic Perspectives Journal and running the IARPP for so many years and all of that, you could readily not have got yourself involved in the world of Masud Khan. So I'd love to know, and I think we all would, what made you want to invest your time and energy into working with Linda to edit these books, and how you, from a very overtly relational perspective, have come to understand Masud Khan, who was very classically trained by people like Anna Freud and Donald Winnicott, and what you make of his work.
Yeah, those are big questions. I wrote a fan letter. I read a page turner, an analytic page turner. I'm not sure how many books we could call that literally, but this was a psychoanalytic page turner called False Self. And it was Linda's biography, of course, that we now have released with her new intro at Carnac. I read the book. I could not really put it down. And I very excitedly searched for her email address. I didn't know Linda before this book, found her online and wrote her basically a somewhat blubbering letter. I can't believe how this book, my God. And guess what happened? She answered me. And she answered me beautifully and with thoughtfulness and the passion that we know she brings to her projects and to her study of Masud Khan. And that was one of the most exciting, one of Linda's most exciting life events that she references. I bet besides her new relationship and moving to DC, but okay, is the discovery of the workbooks at Sybil Stoller's home. One of the most exciting moments in my life was beginning this correspondence and learning more about Masud Khan. And more to the point for me, it was not just Khan who excited me and excites me, but I think as much as Khan, probably more so, It was the world of British psychoanalysis. It was psychoanalytic history. It was probably literally genius mind at work with theory and politics, psychoanalytic politics. And a man so driven, so passionately excited by this field that I think I felt on some level, I don't think, I know that I felt on some level, a kinship. It probably makes me anxious to say that because I also find him truly disgusting and despicable. But his late night study, his passionate writing, his complaints in the workbooks, which are really his diary entries, his complaints around, oh my God, I've taken on too much. How am I going to meet this deadline, this writing deadline, this editing deadline, this teaching prep? I related in my own, perhaps less grand ways. So I felt like I had found a comrade in some ways, and also someone, of course, who I could split off as evil and feel, a certain amount of this was unconscious, of course, and over time maybe became more conscious, but also somebody I can feel better than and better about myself than in some ways. I think that might be some of what excites people about this.
Steve, can I want to add something? I think
Please.
Neither of us knew what we were getting in for. And we're not going to have time here to talk about all that happened and the stress that we have gone through, that major, big time stress and bad stuff that we had to put up with to get these workbooks published. And you didn't know that at the time when you signed on to work with me.
I might not have written to you, Linda.
Yes, I couldn't have gotten through this on my own. It was too stressful. That's just all I want to say here. But without Steve, I wouldn't have done it.
I appreciate that. We clicked, we connected, and it's been quite a journey. The word journey, I feel, gets overused sometimes and even makes me a little bit queasy as it's sometimes used. But this has literally been a journey for Linda, many decades, for me, about a decade or so. And I want to go to your question, Brett. Why would a relational analyst be interested in Masud Khan? I'm not so sure a relational analyst would be necessarily by dint of being a relationally identified therapist. But I am also interested in psychoanalytic history. I'm also very much interested in the analyst's subjectivity. Who are each of us as human beings? What makes us tick? And how does that impact our discovery and use of theory and clinical technique and such? So I was drawn into this world. I don't remember. I know we had talked about discussing whether or not we could see him as on his way to being relational. I might address that point. Okay. The short answer is he certainly was not what we call a big R relational analyst. If we think about little r, right, the umbrella term that we use for object relations theory and interpersonal psychoanalysis, some forms of self-psych and such, he certainly fits there, as did his analyst, mentor, and friend, Winnicott. But fascinatingly, if that's a real word, he was on his way in the direction of a two-person psychology. That's something that kind of grabbed me as I started to learn about Masud from Linda's book and from Masud's writing and from my developing collaboration and friendship with Linda. He was on his way. He was very much interested in the environment. Some might argue even more than Winnicott was, certainly differently so. He used the word mutuality. He talked about mutuality predating Lou Aaron by 15, 20 years, who really developed the concept of the analyst's sense of mutuality with their patient, the joint nature of a collaboration. Lou, who really identified that as a central tenet of relational psychoanalysis, Khan was talking about that, using that word. Khan was talking about multiple self states. He more often referred to them as hidden selves, but nonetheless was moving in the direction of thinking about multiple self states. We are not one singular self. Again, another cornerstone of big R relational thinking and theory. was something else I did want to mention before we move on, and I know that time is tight. There's so much to say. Mutuality, external systems and factors. He gave advice, which classical analysts would really frown upon, but as Brett referenced earlier, Khan was really a man moving beyond interpretation, beyond neutrality. I think he uses the word curse and neutrality in the same sentence in one of the workbook entries. He's cursing perhaps he even calls it the bullshit of neutrality. So he's a 1.5 person psychology, perhaps, but he's much further along in that journey that many of us, if not most of us, have taken, I would say, in our theoretical identifications than his colleagues at the time. It's thrilling. I could talk hours about this topic, but that's that for now.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Steve. That's very helpful. I think our event today is going to really feel rather like a psychoanalytical session where there isn't ever enough time to put all one's thoughts and insights into words. And I do want to ask both of you a very important question about the content. If you could give us a short summary of the content of the workbooks, because I know one or two people have approached me over recent months concerned in case there might be clinical revelations where the Khan was writing about patients. And I know the two of you and the IPA as well have been utterly meticulous in ensuring that no patient details are provided in these workbooks at all. But it'd be very good to hear from you both about the content.
But let me say something, Brett, that one person in particular, but people who tried to stop us from publishing the workbooks, and there was a major effort to stop us, was done by people who had never read the workbooks, but said with great confidence that there was a lot of information about patients in there, and told those patients to write the editor and say that there would be lawsuits if this book was published, and nobody had read the book, and it wasn't going to happen like that. And we lost our first contract for that reason. That's the kind of thing that we've been through.
Yeah, the publisher was pressured, as Linda's referencing, by a couple of powerful people in the psychoanalytic world. And yes, we had, unfortunately, we lost that contract, but very fortunately got adopted by the wonderful Carnac and Confer and Dr. Steven Sederberg and Christina with Perry. And I just want to mention everyone, Lisa, and it's a wonderful team here, but we were up against a lot. What's in the workbooks? Linda and I took out, if there were even vague references to anything, but he really seemed to have an eye on wanting to publish these workbooks, and knowing that he wanted to publish them, that he couldn't keep his clinical case records in there. What's in there? His theoretical formulations that are really exciting to watch him just try to work through. Comments on world events, reflections on his state of mind. It's a quite self-reflective, self-indulgent. Well, it's a diary. I'm not sure if a diary cannot be self-indulgent. Thoughts and ideas and insights into the politics. He talks about the various curriculum chairs at the British Psychoanalytical. He talks about Pearl King. He talks about Leo Rangel. He talks about a number of French psychoanalysts, including Andre Green. It's a who's who. A lot of this is in Linda's biography, but more of the raw data. Not so
don't forget Julie Andrews and Michael Redgrave and Mike
Julie
Nichols.
Andrews, Linda. How can I forget probably my first crush, dragging my grandmother to the Sound of Music or Mary Poppins, or maybe she was dragging me, but at any rate, we saw Julie Andrews all the time when I started reading entries about her and the Redgraves. So at any rate, he is a very social guy. He talks about the fact, I would say so many of his entries, if not most, when it comes to big figures in psychoanalysis, are about his beloved Winnicott. Mm-hmm. But he talks about the fact that Winnicott was a more private man, socially and otherwise, than Khan himself was. And he talks about the fact, one of his journal entries, workbook entries that is, suggests that while Winnicott learns about the world and psychoanalysis from his patients, Khan believes he learns about the world and psychoanalysis from living in the world. with these various colleagues and many, 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 many friends, as Linda said, many or most of whom are names that will be familiar to all of you from within psychoanalysis and the arts, also politics and such. So what's in the workbooks? All of that and much, much more.
And when the two of you have read the workbooks, I mean, the first time I read them through, and I think it's very important just to emphasize that the International Psychoanalytical Association, to help with the publication and to provide coverage,
Absolutely.
created a separate committee, an independent committee of some real-world experts in mental health ethics who went through the workbooks meticulously to really ensure that there are no patient details that are provided.
So let's mention the name Paul Craik there.
Yes,
the manager at IPA, who was essential and wonderful.
Yeah, the executive director of IPA, Paul Craik, was wonderful. And yes, this committee of readers had to sit with every page, every word of the workbooks. The IPA said to us after, I don't know, Linda, how many years was it at that point? 15, 20 years. The IPA said, well, we're getting close to agreeing to allow you to publish. We're getting close. The perhaps last step will be to pick 4 members. We'll pick them, not you, of course, who will read through every word and attest to the fact that there's no clinical material in the workbooks and it's safe to publish. And under Paul's leadership.
That's very important to underscore, and we are very grateful to Paul Craik and all his colleagues for having facilitated that important process. I mean, when I read the workbooks, I thought, part of it is Khan's daily life, as you said. Part of it is a who's who about his friends, his colleagues, his travels. But at times one feels as though one's meeting a kind of cross between, as you said, Linda, William Shakespeare, Fyodor Dostoevsky, sometimes Plato and Aristotle. He writes like a classical philosopher, asking and posing these really crucial questions about the nature of humanity. I find them very, very extraordinary. I don't know if either of you, just to give us one brief example, might like to read out a sort of compelling quotation from the workbooks.
Hey, Brett, maybe we should go on to the audience.
I want to read it. Linda, maybe I'll do this. It's not representative of what Brett is referencing. And you're quite right. It's like reading a gifted philosopher and intellectual, which, by the way, for me, some of that I find appealing and exciting. And I sometimes find it a little bit more abstract or off-putting than some of his first-person personal encounters. But that's part of what makes this so exciting, is that he dabbles in all of these types of writing. Let me read a very quick quote about Winnicott, his experience of Winnicott, from the diary that you'll read when you look at the book. In some 15 years of analytic relationship with DWW, I did succeed at 3 points or occasions to sink into myself, be silent, present in my person, and related to Winnicott. All these 3 occasions were physical, or rather psychosomatic for me. He was in his chair, seated, Winnicott was, and I had got off the couch and buried my head into the side of his coat. I can still hear his heart and watch beating. All else was still and sentiently neutral, and I was at peace. And Winnicott never interpreted on those 3 occasions. He had enabled me to reach to that point, allowed it to actualize, and he let it pass without comment. And these 3 occasions were my only experience of the self in me, in my analysis. Close quote.
That's very, very moving. Thank you, Steve. And we have zillions more questions. I know people will be very keen to want to know what might have been Donald Winnicott's role in helping Masud Khan, or perhaps in deteriorating him in some way. There's been a lot of controversy in the Winnicott communities about the fact that those 2 men had a very long relationship, first as psychoanalyst and patient, and subsequently as colleagues, and Winnicott had become an editor to Masud Khan and a kind of honorary administrator. Masud Khan had become an editor to Winnicott and so forth. but I think people will also want to know about Khan's psychoanalytical colleagues, because he was working with the most experienced British colleagues at that time in the 1960s and 1970s. And I know there's also a lot of concern about, well, why didn't his fellow analysts notice some of his ethical violations sooner, and what might have happened? So that may come up. But just one final question to you both before we open up to our colleagues for a broader discussion. What lessons do you think you've learned about the complexity of human psychology from immersing yourself in Khan? Because in many ways, a lot of people think he might be in a different league to most of the so-called more ordinary minds. Or does everybody have these hidden Masud Khan qualities that we haven't yet discovered? I'd just love to know what your thoughts are as psychological practitioners about where you've come in your understanding about the nature of the human mind.
Okay, so that's easy for me. It makes me really believe in what Winnicott actually and Khan wrote about, that people have multiple incompatible selves, which is very strange, but I truly believe it. And so if I want to know somebody well, I'd like to open myself up to incompatible parts of them and not just think that they blend into one.
Thank you, Linda. And Steve?
I think some of the answers to the question are in your question, Brett. Just the assumption of such tremendous complexity. One of your recent book titles, Dangerous Lunatics. But Khan and Winnicott were onto something about hidden selves and multiple self states, although they didn't quite come out and write about it as fully as that. Khan talks about two bodies in dialogue, which is, my goodness, that's really on the way to two-person psychology, of course, two bodies, two people. But what they didn't know yet, what we as psychoanalysts didn't know then that we know now, is that these self-states are dissociated. Bromberg has his beautiful phrase, Philip Bromberg, of standing in the spaces. He's referring to standing in the spaces of the disparate self-states. So I would just want to add perhaps that nuance or thought to some of what Linda is saying. Can we help ourselves and our students and our patients to make contact with otherwise inaccessible self-states? Winnicott and Khan failed at that task, it seems to me. As much as we love and cherish the good work and theorizing, to say the least, of Winnicott and Khan, they perhaps were not able to get to that place. And I think we learned that about the human psyche as well.
And that's it really from us. So I just wanted to say goodbye. And I'm sure Linda and Steve and Brett will all want to say goodbye to you as well as you sign off.
Thank you, everybody. Brett, I'm sorry.
Wonderful questions.
Yeah, thank you for being here with us in this. It's exciting and gratifying, and they are wonderful questions.